So welcome everyone to the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services New Day Services Transformation Grant Pre-Bid Conference. Today, we are going to give you an overview of the New Day Services Transformation Grant. My name is Shirlene Harris, and I'm a senior consultant at Public Consulting Group, and I am the project manager for this scope of work. Also joining me today are Rachel Wyant, who is the grant lead for this project, and Peter Busby, who is in charge of communications. From the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services, we also have Megan Shepard on the line today, who is the Policy and Program Oversight Director. Megan, I'm going to turn it over to you if you just want to say hello and give a few remarks.
Yes, everyone, good morning. Thank you for joining us on this Monday to discuss these important grants to help us transition into the New Day service definitions. Our team has been working really hard to develop all these, and I hope that you will take advantage of this wonderful funding opportunity and find a way that we can all work together to develop these important services. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Megan. So before we get started and talking about the agenda, I did just want to give a few reminders that there will be time at the end to ask questions. So we do ask that any questions or feedback that you might have that you put in the Q&A, and we will address those questions at the end. We will also try to address some of them during the presentation, but we do have a lot of content to get through today. So we want to make sure that we are able to give you as much information as possible with leaving a little bit of time at the end for questions. Please know that those questions will be added to the FAQ that can be found on the grants webpage, and those will be added on April the 2nd. In addition, a copy of the slides, a recording of the pre-bid conference, and a transcript will also be posted to the grants website. Here you can see our agenda for today. We're going to go over PCG's role in the grant program, provide you an overview of the grant program. We're going to talk about eligible and ineligible expenses. We're going to provide a high-level overview of the grant application. And then, as I just mentioned, we will have time for questions at the end. Next slide. So PCG's role, or Public Consulting Group, we are a public sector consulting firm that works with health, education, and human services agencies. And KDAD's contracted with PCG to help administer the New Day grant. And as such, we have assisted with the development of the grant program and related materials. And once applications are submitted, we will also help support the reviewing of those applications, the issuing of notification of grant agreement, or the NOGA, as you will hear that referred to. We will also be collecting invoices for reimbursement, as this is a reimbursement-based grant, which we will talk a little bit more about in the upcoming slides. And we will also support the issuing of payments to grantees. Next, we're going to give you a high-level overview of the grant program. The request for applications, or RFA, was released on March the 10th and should be read in its entirety before applying for the grant. As I mentioned, this presentation is a high-level overview of the most important information from the RFA. However, it does not cover all of the information in the RFA. So we please ask that you read the RFA prior to applying. And the RFA can be found on the grant webpage. We will be dropping a link, as Peter just did, into the chat section so you can access that easily. The purpose of the New Day Grant is to help home and community-based services, day services providers, align with the proposed unbundled day services definitions. And when we talk about unbundled day services definitions, that is taking the current components that are part of the day services waiver and separating them into 7 distinct services that are listed at the bottom. As part of the New Day Grant, we want to help individuals receiving day services access community integrated services, and also assist those individuals in accessing competitive integrated employment services such as pre-vocational, life skills, career exploration and planning, and individualized employment support. We also would like to support day service providers in gaining relevant accreditations, certifications, or licenses, as well as training staff and necessary skills. Application guidelines. The eligible providers for this grant can apply for between $10,000 and $200,000 in grant funding. It's important to note that applicants can only apply once per National Provider Identifier Number, or NPI number. So that means that no matter how many sites you might have, you are only allowed to apply for the grant one time. However, you can apply alone or as a partnership. So if there is another entity with which you would like to partner, you can certainly do that. But it is important to note that the lead applicant will be the primary contact for the grant. So that means if there are questions that we might have or additional information that is needed, if you're chosen as an awardee and you submit a reimbursement request and there's additional information that is needed or questions about that, those will all be directed to the lead applicant. If you are applying for this grant, you must propose to use funds in a way that aligns with the proposed unbundled day services definitions, that promotes community integration, competitive integrated employment, and person-centered practices, and also aligns with the HCBS settings final rule. Applications must be submitted by 5 p.m. on April 14th, 2025 using the online portal. And again, all of these items are linked, and we will also be dropping links in the chat. Next, we're going to talk about eligible applicants. So to be eligible to apply for the New Day Grant, you must be a Kansas HCBS day service provider who meets all of the following criteria. You must serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, serve 25 or more unduplicated individuals receiving HCBS. So unduplicated means that if you have an individual that is receiving day services in your setting 5 days a week, that individual is counted as one unduplicated individual. Applicants must be fully licensed Kansas HCBS day service providers, and you must be in good standing with KDADS, your managed care organization, and the Community Developmental Disability Organization, or CDDO. You must not have an active KDADS, MCO, or CDDO corrective action plan, or if you do have an active CAP. You must fully explain how you propose to use the grant funds to mitigate your CAP. Next, we're going to talk about application objectives. So applicants must select one of the following objectives, and that means that you are designing a grant program that's going to focus on one of the two objectives or on both. So objective 1 is unbundling services. That means that you are intending to modify your current program to align with the proposed unbundled day services definition. And in doing so, you will enhance individuals' access to community integrated services and/or improve access to competitive integrated employment services. Objective 2 is accreditation and professional development. So in preparation for the proposed unbundled day services definition, your agency is looking to obtain or renew accreditations, licenses, or certifications, or you're looking to train staff to enhance relevant skills. And then objective 3 is you may want to do both, a combination of objective 1, unbundling services, and objective 2, accreditation and professional development. Next, we're going to talk about some important dates that you need to be aware of. So as we mentioned, the questions that we received during the pre-bid conference will be added to an FAQ that will be posted on the grant webpage by April the 2nd. Any additional questions that you might have after this conference today or in reading through the RFA must be received by March the 26th by 5 p.m. As I mentioned, responses to the questions will be posted on April the 2nd, and applications for the New Day grant are due by 5 p.m. on April the 14th. The anticipated award letter distribution date is May the 28th, and the grant period will start on July the 1st and end on December the 31st. As mentioned, this is a reimbursement-based grant. So that means that organizations will be paying upfront for their expenses and then requesting reimbursement. And the final reimbursement request will be due on January the 31st, 2026. As I just mentioned, the New Day grant operates exclusively through reimbursement. So that means that grantees must incur and pay for expenses first and then submit for reimbursement. There will be no prospective payments, and spending that occurs before the NOGA is executed is not eligible for reimbursement. So it'll be very important that you have a fully signed, executed copy of your NOGA before any expenses are incurred. And grantees must expend all grant funds by December the 31st. And I believe I just saw about asking questions in the chat, which is good news because this tells you how to ask questions. Questions about the grant program are due by 5 p.m. on March the 26th, and the answers to questions will be posted on the grant webpage. Applicants can email kdadsgrants@pcgus.com with any other questions throughout the grant period. And you can also call the number that we have listed here Monday through Friday from 9 to 5 p.m. Central Time. Now I'm going to hand it over to Rachel Wyant, who is going to go a little bit more in detail about eligible and ineligible expenses.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Charlene. Can someone confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Rachel.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So like Charlene, this is also intended to just be a high-level overview of all the eligible and ineligible expenses. And I wanted to start with general expense guidelines. So all of the expenses have to be necessary to do one or more of the following. So they have to align with the proposed unbundled day services, and they have to enhance individuals' access to community integrated services, or they have to improve access to competitive integrated employment services. Additionally, all of these expenses have to show how they do not supplant or double dip with any other funding source. And so what we're looking in your application for all of them is that you clearly show us that this is not something that you are already getting paid for through some, say, HCBS or another funding source, and how this is a new expense for your organization. Next slide, please. So some things that you can request reimbursement for in your application is administrative costs, and that could include staff time or contractor costs to create or revise policy documentation, documents needed to align with the proposed unbundled day services. It could also include capital expenses such as building and facility improvements, and that again could be has to align with the proposed unbundled service definitions, or it could be to meet the HCBS final settings rule, or it could be to meet ADA standards. Of note with capital expenditures, it cannot exceed 25% of your total budget. Additionally, you can request funding for marketing and communication, and that can include things like updating a website or getting out flyers to individuals who will be impacted by these changes. It could also include basic translation services. Next slide, please. And additionally, it can also include moving costs. So say you have to move to a bigger or smaller location to be able to implement these changes. There are some costs that are included, and then you can see on the screen, we go into a little bit more level of detail of what those could look like. Additionally, if you do need to move into a new space, it could include fees for deposits to allow individuals to be served in a new location, as well as fees or funds for terminating an existing lease if that's necessary. And again, we're going to be looking for you in your application to fully explain the why of why you need this, and that's something we'll consider. Next slide, please. Additionally, you can request funds for technology and equipment for new hires. That could include laptops, tablets, keyboards, mice, anything that they need to be able to do their job. It also could include fees for software. And again, we're looking at something that you're not already doing today. We're looking for something that's not funded through any other source, but something that you might need, say like a quality management software system, HR software system, document management system, something like that is something that we will consider. You also can include expenses for implementation costs to have somebody come in to help you install the software and make sure it works within your current technology system. Additionally, you can request funds for protective devices, accessories, protection plans, and supports up to 15% of the purchase price of the devices. Additionally, you can request funds for transportation for community integration. So that can include down payments or continued payments on vehicle purchases. This can include fees for public transportation, for taxis, for rideshare services, or livery transportations. For those of you that aren't familiar with the term livery, that's basically a ride service that usually has more than one vehicle in their fleet. And this would be for you to be able to take individuals receiving services to be able to attend community integration activities. Like say you're taking them to a park or to the concert or to a zoo. So it would have to be something that would help support individuals getting out into the community that are typically part of your day program. It also can include necessary vehicle repairs and maintenance during the grant period. And it can also include modifying a vehicle for accessibility. So this could include things like a side access step, swivel seating, a wheelchair lift, an accessibility lift, those types of expenses. It also can include fees for somebody to get their commercial driver's license. And a big note with this category is this grouping of expenses cannot exceed 50% of your total budget. And additionally, for folks who are applying for this, you can choose to opt in for indirect costs, and that would be 10% of your total budget. If you choose to opt out, then we won't include that. Otherwise, if you choose to opt in, we'll automatically tack on 10% to your budget. And again, when we look at indirect costs, that's up to that $200,000, including indirect costs. So just want to make sure we're clear on that out of the gate. Next slide, please. So the next grouping is for anybody who's applying just for category 2 or anybody who's applying for both. And this would be for the objective of accreditation and professional development. So this also can include some administrative costs. And again, it's more geared towards training and accreditation, as opposed to the first one, it's more geared towards, again, that policy development for the unbundled service definitions. It also can include licensure and credentialing fees. So we might see something like the NCQA or the CARF accreditation or certification. Those types of expenses are something we'd expect to see and that you can request. You also can include fees to provide training and development programs for staff. Of note, again, we can't double dip. So it can't be any required training that you already have today. This would have to be something new that's not required that we're using to supplement your existing budget. Those are the trainings that we can look at to use grant funds for. Additionally, the same thing with professional certifications and licensures. Again, it's got to be anything new that can help supplement. And this category also applies for technology and equipment. And we'd expect to see things like purchasing and renting space or purchasing and renting technology that you don't do today. We might see things like an online training platform, a smart board, things like that that you may need to be able to better train your staff on these upcoming changes and also enhance just the quality of the work that you do. Next slide, please. In addition, you can also use some grant funds to hire an external facilitator to provide some of these trainings. And again, that differentiation of it's got to be something that you aren't already paid to do. It's got to be a non-required training that you would ask for a facilitator to come in to help with. It can also include things like registration fees, books and manuals, fees for attending industry conferences, seminars, networking events, fees to rent space, any training-related travel costs. Of note, there are some guidelines and the request for application that talk about what you can request for some of these caps. And so there's more detail in the RFA. And again, other training programs that are designed to teach like transportation safety because of that community integrated employment piece and the community integration component. Additionally, it can include training stipends for staff to attend trainings, up to $50 for training or up to $250 per staff. And lastly, we talked about indirect costs for the other category. This category also includes indirect costs. If you're a provider who's looking to apply for category 3 both, of note that 10% is for your entire application. So just want to make sure I'm making that clear. Next slide, please. Next piece is I wanted to talk about if you apply for Objective 3, just note it's a combination of everything that I've already talked about. So there isn't anything different for Category 3. It's just a combination of Category 1 and Category 2. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk about ineligible expenses for all objectives. Again, we already talked about no supplanting or double dipping any existing funding source. 2, it can't be any costs that occur outside of the grant period. So we're anticipating that the grant period will start on July 1st, and we know that it will end December 31st of 2025. It cannot take over payments for any existing debts or loans that occurred outside of the grant period. So just want to make sure we're clear of that out of the gate. It can't, again, be for costs for anything that's already funded through another grant. It can't be for any lobbying or political activities. It can't be for any entertainment or any social activities. It can't be for any transportation expenses, excluding what I already spoke about. It can't be for any programming supplies. So it can't be for any activity supplies. It can't be for office supplies. It can't be for art supplies. It also can't be for any care personal supplies, food, or equipment for individuals receiving services. It can't be for any employment activities that do not meet all federal and state requirements for competitive integrated employment. It can't be for any tips, excluding those that you might need for rideshare services if you're taking individuals to community integrated services. And it can't be for anything that KDADS denies during your grant review or during your application review. Next slide, please. Additionally, it can't be for administrative costs. It can't be for any general admin expenses that are not tied specifically to any of these projects or to any of the objectives of the grant. So it's got to be very clear to us about how your fees and your requested expenses tie to this grant. It also can't be for any general marketing or for any general advertising expenses that, again, it's not directly tied to the grant. It can't be for any capital expenditures that are not necessary to align with the proposed unbundled day service definitions or to meet the ADA standards. And it can't be for any type of paid employment activities for individuals receiving services. And none of these expenses can support a home office. It only has to be for a commercial space. And if you want to see the definition of home office, that is in the RFA. Additionally, it can't be for any moving expenses to and from a home office. And it also can't be for any equipment or technology given to employees or individuals receiving services for their permanent use. Next slide, please. We already talked about this one, but I'll bring it up again. With transportation for community service provision, we just want to make sure everybody's clear that it cannot exceed 50% of your total grant budget. So just want to make sure everybody sees that. It also can't be for any insurance or lease payments. And it also can't be to hire staff or to provide staff incentives or bonuses. So again, we can't hire a driver, essentially using grant funds for using this grant. Additionally, for training costs not directly related to aligning with the proposed unbundled day service definitions is not eligible use of funds for this grant. And it also cannot be used for staff time to attend training during their normal working hours. And lastly, with indirect costs, again, if it's not specifically tied to this project, it's not something that's eligible to be used for this grant. Next slide, please. All right, now next I'm going to hand it off to Peter to talk more about the grant application.
Thank you, Rachel. So as Rachel said, we'll just walk through a bit of the grant application now, so y'all know how to apply. But first, how do you apply? So as we said earlier, you must submit your application through the online portal on JotForm. We do have a link here. I will say as well, if you visit the grant webpage, which we've put a link to in the chat, you'll find right up there at the very top a link to the application. So you can easily find it there as well. If you see the application and you have some questions or need some more detailed instructions, you can check out attachment A. That's at the very bottom of the webpage under helpful resources. That will provide some more information for you as well. But as we also said when we were reviewing our important dates, applications are due by 5 p.m. on April 14th, 2025. You also cannot edit your application after you submit it. So make sure you review it. You're happy with everything you see before you finally click that submit button. But when you do go to the application, this is just the first page you'll see. It lays out just a few of those guidelines we went over earlier. Your first section is minimum eligibility. You'll just acknowledge all of the eligibility requirements listed in the RFA, just making sure your organization abides by them. You will also, as part of this section, acknowledge that you will not use your grant funds to supplant existing Medicaid HCBS funds, and that this is a reimbursement-based grant. So you must incur any expenses before you will then be reimbursed for them. Next is your administrative and tax information. You'll just enter the name and MPI number for your organization, as well as contact information for a few key personnel. And it'll also provide your taxpayer identification That'll either be your social security number or your employment identification number, and upload a completed and signed W-9 form. There's a link to the form, I believe, on that page of the application. Next is the current state of your organization. Obviously enough, that'll just give us some facts about your organization at present. So that'll include any current corrective action plans, any CAPs, the number of individuals you presently serve, any accreditations and certifications that you currently have, and any staff training and development programs you currently operate. At this point, you will also indicate which of those 3 objectives that Rachel described earlier that you are applying for. You then get to service components. So this involves those unbundled service components that we referenced earlier. We put a link to these in the chat as well, and they are also on the grant webpage. You can find a link from there. But you will pick which of these 7 unbundled service components you presently provide and which you intend to provide in the future. At that point, you will then get to your proposed grant program. So basically, you're just indicating to us how you intend to use your grant fundings. So that includes the goals and intended impact, your plan for implementing your overall grant program, how you will measure if your program is successful or not, your plan for sustaining that grant program into the future after grant funding ends, and finally, any partners or subcontractors, if any, that will work with you on this project. At that point, you will then reach a couple of extra credit questions. You'll just select yes or no, depending on which one applied to you. And if you select yes, you'll then have to give a brief description of how your organization or project meets that criteria. And Rachel, I believe this then comes back to you for the budget instructions specifically.
It does. Thank you, Peter.
Mhm.
Peter, can you confirm you can hear me again, please?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Rachel.
Right. Perfect. All right. So the first step is when you get to the budget is open up the attachment B new day budget detail spreadsheet. Of note, that spreadsheet was recently updated, so make sure you're using the recent version with the word updated in it. And someone on my team will also drop a link of that in the chat. When you open up this Excel document, you'll notice there'll be a security warning that says enable content. You'll see on our screen that we have a red box that shows what that is. Make sure you hit enable content to begin. And then you want to navigate to the objective tab. And from that objective tab, you need to pick which objective you're going to apply for. So it'll either be the objective 1, 2, or 3. And that's how you start your budget detail spreadsheet. Next slide, please. Then use the arrows at the bottom of your screen to navigate to the budget categories that you want to apply for. So in this example, I have the technology and equipment budget category up. Then you're going to complete all of the pieces. So in this example, you can see that I chose that I want to include laptops. I put in what the unit price is, the quantity, the estimated sales tax, and then the budget detail spreadsheet will automatically do the calculation in gray for you. And then we want to know the narrative. So this is where we want to know what you're intending to buy, what it's used for, and how it ties back to the grant. Then, if you have more than one expense for that category, just repeat that process for that budget category. And then if you have other categories that you also want to apply for, you repeat that same process across the tabs. Next slide, please. Everyone needs to fill out the indirect cost tab before they finish. So if you want to opt in for indirect costs, you will select yes by the upper arrow that you can see, or you can select no if that's not something that you want to opt in for. Note, if you do opt in to receive indirect costs, you must track all of your indirect costs and keep all of those records on file. Next slide, please. Then, after you've completed all the tabs, navigate to the Total Budget Request tab, and then you will see all of the budget categories listed and all of the expenses that you've requested. And so at this point, do a review just to make sure what you see on the total budget request is what you expect. If you have any troubles with this spreadsheet, that's when you can reach out to us and we're happy to walk you through it. But at this piece, again, I just want to make sure you're reviewing it and it aligns with what you're expecting. At this stage, after you've reviewed everything, make sure you save a copy of this and save it as an Excel file. Next slide, please. Then what you do is after you finish that Excel file, navigate back to the JotForm application and then pull up your budget detail spreadsheet. How I intend to do this if I were filling it out is I would have one screen up or had my screen split, and I would have my Excel budget details spreadsheet on one screen, and then I would have my JotForm application on the other screen. So then what you're going to do is in step 10, you can see that I've got the application up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the description categories, and then I'm going to do the check boxes in the application. So the upper 10 is showing you the JotForm application. The lower 10 on your screen is showing you the JotForm application is the lower screen. The budget details Excel spreadsheet is the upper 10. So what you're going to do is you're going to transfer the description from your Excel document, and you're going to check the boxes for the application that align. And then for number 11, what you're going to do for that step is you're going to take the total budget request from your Excel, and then you're going to transfer that data into JotForm. And then for step 12, you're also just going to transfer the total budget request, and you're going to transfer that into JotForm. So basically, you're just moving information from your Excel document into your application. Next slide, please. Then once you've done this for each budget category, then what you will need to do is you'll need to review the total budget request from your Excel, and you want to mirror what you have in your application. Of note, if there's any variance, either because of rounding or keying error, what we will use is what is in JotForm. And the other piece is you want to make sure that not only do all your direct costs calculations match, you want to make sure all your indirect cost calculation matches as well at this point. Next slide, please. And again, at this point, you want to compare your spreadsheet to make sure that everything matches. If they don't match, use the back button and go back and through to see wherever there's any variance. And then once everything does match, go ahead and keep moving forward. Next slide, please. Last, after everything matches, you're going to upload a copy of your budget detailed spreadsheet to JotForm. So you'll attach it. Of note, it only accepts Excel documents here. It won't accept a PDF or any other format. So make sure you're uploading it as an Excel file. Once you've uploaded your Excel file, hit next, and we'll move forward to the next screen. Next slide, please. Okay, and then where we'll end with the application is the closing and signature section. And so you'll need to provide any other information that KDEDS might know. So it's asking, is there anything else about your application you'd like KDEDS to know? That's an optional field. You will have to key in the contact information for the person submitting the application. And then you have to check an attestation that your application is accurate and that you acknowledge that you cannot make any edits after you submit your application. So I'm just going to highlight that there, that once you submit, your application is considered final and you cannot make any edits at that point. Next, you need to sign, date, and then submit your application. And then after you submit your application, you'll receive an email confirmation letting you know that your application was received, and it'll include a PDF copy of your application for your records. If you do not receive this confirmation email, please email us at kdadsgrants@pcgus.com before the grant deadline, and we will help support you. All right. At this point, we are at the questions period. So just friendly housekeeping is you can either raise your hand or add your question to the chat. And as a reminder, we will include any questions that apply to everyone in the updated FAQ that will be posted to the grant webpage. And we will post that updated FAQ on or around April 2nd. Always a friendly reminder to always check the grant webpage for all the latest information. And you can also, if we don't have time to get to your question today, or if you have a question that comes up later, you can also email the address on the screen, or you can call us between 9 to 5 Central Time, Monday through Friday, with any additional questions. And with that, I'm going to open up for questions.
Thank you, Rachel. We've got a few in the Q&A already, so I think we'll just sort of move through them as we get them.
Sure.
So question from Rachel Newman. If grant funds can be used to cover staff costs for day activities.
I'm not clear on what day activities mean.
So the example Rachel gives is attending a Royals game. So I imagine it's for, community activities, things out with participants, to engage with the community.
So the grant funds can be used for transportation for community integration to get you to a Royals game if you have individuals receiving services going to that, but grant funds are not intended for the fee for going to like a baseball game or whatever it might be. So this is, the grant funds are limited, again, just for the transportation to be able to get them out.
Rachel, what about the staff time? Like the actual, I imagine the
That
question
also is not the intent of the grant.
Gotcha.
Yep. No, that would be something, one, if you're already billing HCBS for their time, that would be double dipping, but two, that's also not in alignment with the intent of the grant.
Gotcha. I imagine we'll have a similar answer for the next question. This one's for an anonymous attendee. If they already provide community integrated activities and they provide transportation, can they use grant funds to cover their fuel and mileage? I imagine this would be a similar case. If they're already being paid to provide these services, they wouldn't be able to use grant funds to cover that as well.
Let's bring that one back.
Okay.
I know that if you're an HCBS provider, I want to make sure I'm reading through the community integration piece to make sure I'm very clear with what is covered and what is not. I'm hesitant to answer that one live. We'll update the FAQ with that response.
Sounds good. Yeah, as Rachel said, just to put a point on that, for any questions we can't answer, they'll go on that FAQ on the webpage. You can find that, as I said, under helpful resources at that bottom of that page. A question from an anonymous attendee. They were told by a CARF rep that accreditations take up to, let's say, 18 months. How would we suggest using funding to support this if it ends this calendar year? So I will admit I'm not completely familiar with all the in and outs of how one achieves CARF funding. So my suggestion would be to pay as much upfront really as necessary. But Rachel, if you have more, let's say, useful suggestions, I'm happy to entertain them.
I think the biggest piece with grant funds, and especially with this bucket, is they are intended to help supplement, but they're not intended to cover every bit of your expense. And so during the grant period, if you are approved to be able to receive that accreditation, you can defray it during the grant period. However, you might have to pay privately after the grant period ends to be able to finish that accreditation. And again, it's because these grant funds are intended to supplement, but not to cover all of the costs.
And then, Rachel, I'm probably going to rely on you for a lot of these, but do we have any further information beyond just suggesting people read the RFA to help sort of define entertainment? Like the example specifically Chris is asking about is membership for community activities and organizations, right? Things like museums, zoos, what have you.
That is not part of this grant. So the transportation to be able to get individuals receiving services out to community integrated activities such as the zoo is included. But when it comes to anything else for individuals receiving services like a zoo pass or getting them into the zoo, that is not in alignment with the intent of the grant. So that is not covered.
A couple of questions from Karen. We can sort of take them one at a time. So the first question, what is the exact funding source for this grant? I believe I know, Rachel, but at the risk of saying something wrong, I'll let you answer first.
It is through the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. So that's federal dollars.
And we can also say, to get to your last question, Karen, that these are secured fundings. You know, that this is what the funds are earmarked for. These ARPA dollars are committed in this case. And then, Rachel, do we have a total available amount beyond just what individuals can request?
I do not have that off the top of my head. Forgive me.
No problem, Karen. We'll get that into that FAQ. We'll make sure you get an answer at some point. A question from Paula. Do programs have to be renamed or just adjusted to meet definitions? I don't believe it would matter to us what they're named. I mean, you could probably name them whatever you wanted, provided they followed the guidelines. But you will need to make it clear in your application how those programs align with those unbundled service definitions. So we will need enough information to at least judge that. Beyond that, I imagine you can name them whatever you'd like. Question from Patrick. Is the indirect 20% in addition to the max 20K request? Rachel, I'll let you tackle this one.
To be clear, it's 10%. Even if you're applying for both categories, it's 10% of your total budget, and that is inclusive of that 200,000. So you can't exceed 200,000 even with the indirect costs.
Question from Paula. If an ineligible request is included in the request, will the organization be notified to adjust the request? So I will say, I know KDADS has the discretion to award basically parts of your application, right? If you request ineligible things, to remove them. I will say, Paula, I don't know that we can guarantee that you will be notified if you put an ineligible request in there. I mean, once you submit that application, it is submitted. So while it won't bar you from an award, I don't believe that you'll have the chance to adjust anything.
You will not. I can answer that directly. And so if you include an ineligible item, what will happen is when you receive your notice, NOGA, your notice of grant award or grant agreement, it will include in the attachment within that document your approved budget. And it will tell you for each line item how much was approved, and it'll give you some detail of what it is, but it won't include the ineligible items. And so you will just receive a lower amount if something is excluded.
We have a few as well in the chat, so I'm just going to bounce over there for a second to take care of these. If you could, just moving forward, please do add them to the Q&A, just because it's easier for me to keep track of. Okay, so is it possible, so this is a question from Michelle, is it possible that PCG or KDADS would deny an expense that was listed in the award letter? So my guess is, the question is, if we awarded something, like said, hey, you could have funding for this, and then they submitted an invoice later on, if we would then deny that invoice. Michelle, I imagine
I can
that's...
answer this directly.
Oh, perfect, Rachel.
Yes, is the short answer. So if we say you're eligible for, the community integration for transportation, but when you submit a receipt, if it exceeds what you were awarded, we could maybe pay the difference of what you're awarded, but if it's over, we won't pay something that's over. If there's insufficient documentation to show how that aligns to the grant, it potentially could get denied. If there's some questions on pieces, so yes, everything will have to be in place, and we have to show that it's within compliance with the grant for us to be able to award it. So we hope to not do this, and we hope to be able to support you if you have questions and to be able to provide you an opportunity to submit an update. So all of those are pieces, But yes, there may be times if you do not submit sufficient documentation to support it, that it could get denied.
Thank you, Rachel. Question from Shelby. If training, accreditations, and new software must be finalized and invoiced by December 2025. So you do need to incur any expenses by that date. So to say invoiced, most likely. Finalized, I don't know if you need to finish all your implementation. That could probably extend past that date, but if there are any associated expenses, you would not be able to request reimbursement for them if they occurred after that December 2025 deadline. Rachel, anything to add?
Peter, I'm going to add to that. Not only do you have to incur the expense by 12/31/2025, so that means you've got the invoice, you also have to pay it by 12/31/2025. You can submit the reimbursement request as late as 1/31/2026. So you do have some time to do the paperwork on it, but you have had to incur it. So you got the invoice and pay it for it to be eligible for reimbursement.
Thank you, Richard. Good addition. Question from David, if the grant can be used to cover the cost of vehicle purchase. So it can certainly be used to cover the cost of a down payment. I mean, I imagine if you're paying it all in one go, it can also be used for a vehicle purchase.
It can be both.
Perfect. All right, that takes care of all in the chat. I will go back to the Q&A now. Question from Rachel, can it be used to expand on software programs you already have? Rachel, I don't think that would be ineligible for any reason.
So the biggest piece is it can't take over payments. So it gets tricky, right? It gets a little nuanced. So if you say are paying, $100 a month for some software, we can't take over the payments. However, say there's a new upgrade and it's something that's different or it's add-ons, you have to really clearly explain in that application how this is new and how is this going towards the grant goals, right? We don't want to just take over your existing operating expenses. It's got to be tied to the grant's objectives. And so if you make a strong case for it in your application, we'll consider it. It gets nuanced. So maybe, but that's not a guarantee.
I imagine it'll be a similar answer to this next question. An anonymous attendee asks, the final rule training must be completed online. Would the grant help cover additional technology to be purchased to complete this training? So we do cover technology and we do cover certain training expenses. I imagine it would depend on the exact specifics of what's happening here. So my recommendation would be either anonymous attendee, make a good, solid, cogent argument in your application, which everybody should be doing, and we will certainly consider it. Or if you'd like to email us at that KDADS Grants email address, again, prior to that question deadline, we can try to give you some more guidance. If you can give us some more details on exactly, what fees and technology we're talking about here. Okay. Question from Ryan. Could the funds be used for persons served to participate in community activities and events? So like ticket costs, entry fees, things like that. Rachel, you're saying no.
Unfortunately, that is not within the scope of this grant.
Could grant funds be used to complete a build out on a new commercial day service space to meet the unbundling requirements? Question from Jessica.
I'm looking at capital expenditures. I think as long as it aligns with the objectives of the grant, it could include you can include it in your application. We'll look at it, make sure it's very clear that this is new, not something that's already funded through any other source, and that it aligns with the goals of the grant.
It also, if if this is a capital expenditure, Jessica, that you're describing, it cannot exceed 25% of your total application budget. So just be aware that there is a funding limitation there. Can funds be used for computers for persons in vocational services to apply for jobs, create resumes, etc.? So I know, Rachel, we cannot include equipment for individuals' permanent use. So you couldn't give these computers to participants. I'm not sure if they stayed within the center, let's say, what the ruling would be there.
Let's bring that one back and update the FAQ.
Sounds good. So anonymous attendee, we will make sure we add that to the FAQ. As we said, that will get posted to the grant webpage. Rachel, I believe we answered this next one already. The question about whether or not PCG or KDADS would deny an expense.
We did, and there is that potential.
Does current CARF accreditation earn extra credit on the application? All of the extra credit criteria, I believe, are in the RFA. Is that correct, Rachel? So, Chris, yeah, I would recommend if you just take a look at the RFA, you will see very clearly laid out sort of what's included there. Can grant funds be used to purchase a new ADA lift van to facilitate group community or job skill outings? I believe, yes, the RFA includes funds
Yeah.
for vehicle modifications. Yes. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. And again, of note that you cannot exceed 50% of your budget for transportation in that instance. But yes, you can include it.
Patrick, to answer your question, I know I'm skipping ahead just a little bit, but yes, the minimum request is $10,000 for the application. Question from an anonymous attendee. Under life skills, would the grant cover equipment to help teach skills like cooking, stove, oven, microwave, that sort of thing? I think it might depend on the equipment and sort of where it's deployed. Yeah, I don't know, like specifically.
I don't recall including. Yeah, we can take that one back as well.
Yeah. Anonymous attendee too. If you have like a more specific request, like if you have an exact set of equipment in mind, please feel free to email us just to make sure we capture what you want to know in the answer. Okay, when are the rates going to be determined and released to providers for the different unbundled service categories? So anonymous attendee, we do know that this is a question a lot of people are interested in, but this webinar right now is specifically related to the grant program itself. So if you'd like to reach out to KDADS to find out more about the unbundled service definitions, I would encourage you to do so. It's just not really in our purview for today. Anticipating certain items to be denied when applying, would it be acceptable to submit items exceeding the $20,000 limit, or excuse me, $200,000 limit? No. I appreciate you trying to get as much of the grant as you can, but you can't throw a bunch at us and hope enough gets approved. You do need to stay within that limit.
Of note, your application will be denied because it exceeds that limit. So just want to make sure we're very clear that none of it will be considered if it's over 200,000.
A question from Maria, more or less asking if they pay the entire cost of a vehicle in one shot, if all of that is eligible for grant reimbursement.
So in your example, I think you said, okay, if you request 200,000 total, if you pay for a vehicle for 100,000 and you request, you submit for reimbursement for that whole 100,000, could you get all that back in one payment? I believe so. Bree, are you on the line? Are you able to answer that? We can bring that back, but I believe so, and I'll confirm with our finance team. And if we can't get confirmation in the next minute, we will definitely update the FAQ with this.
Similar question from an anonymous attendee, just asking, if they bought a vehicle for 100K, if it would be reimbursed completely. As Rachel said, we'll get that answer to you either as part of this webinar or more likely in the FAQ. Rachel, can I get a time?
Yes, in theory. We have 1 minute left.
Okay. So I will say, I know that there are a bunch of questions we did not get to. We appreciate your interest in the grant program and your engagement with our webinar right now. We will take those questions back. We will make sure they all get an answer in the FAQ. And as it says on the screen right now, feel free to email us with more questions if there are any you didn't get a chance to ask today. If you already submitted your question in the chat or Q&A and we just didn't have time to answer it, you do not need to submit it again. We have a copy, we will hang on to it. So with that, I will then throw it to Rachel. Are you wrapping up for us?
I can. So we are at time. So again, thank you all for attending. And again, as Peter said, you are welcome to reach out to us with any questions, and we look forward to seeing your application. All right. Thank you all for joining.